Hello everyone, welcome to another best practice video. I'm pleased to be joined by Ryan Weispfenning, the VP and Head of Investor Relations. So thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. It's great to have you here, obviously from Medtronic. Ryan, we just wanted to start off because the current climate has really changed the face of capital markets universally. But working for Medtronic, they've been really closely involved in supporting medics around the world with your products. From an IR perspective, how would you characterize the last 12 months?
Wow, where do I start? It's been a very different 12 months to be working in investor relations, and especially working for a medical device company like Medtronic. But I'd have to say, looking back, I think this is where IR at Medtronic and IR or Medtronic as a company has really shined. When we look back and saying, okay, we're not going to be traveling, we're not going to be attending these healthcare conferences where we and my team put on analyst events for analysts, and we do several of those a year. How can we pull that off? How can we deal with the management team that's spread around the world and bring them together, bring analysts together, and provide events for them? And so we've had those challenges to work through and successfully work through. But then when you look at the company at Medtronic, and to your question, it's been just inspiring to work for this company. I've been here now over 20 years. And this is a point in time when the company was really pushed into action. Whether that was supplying ventilators to hospitals around the world that so desperately needed them, to work with partners around the world in order to do that. And then from an IR perspective, helping to tell that story and helping to give investors a sense on what's going on in each of our businesses, because we touch so many different therapy areas in a hospital, and then what's going on in all the different geographies around the world. That's a massive amount of information to get through, but to synthesize it and get it down to what investors really need to hear and get it to them in a way they can absorb that information. That's been a challenge, but an opportunity. And yeah, it's been a really interesting 12 months.
Absolutely, yeah, and I can imagine lots of challenges that you've mentioned there. I'm really curious to understand what you've learned from those challenges. So whether it is, understanding what's happening in different geographies, or communicating that story. Obviously, you've been with the company for 20 years, but what have you sort of learned in the last 12 months that you're going to take moving forward?
Yeah, I think, from a technology perspective, I've learned a lot. How do we pull off all of these complex events where people are in multiple locations and do it in a way that's seamless and provide that webcast that's needed for the public in order to hear it. To have these forums where you can still get your information across even in this environment, because people are all still working. They still are looking for this information. And just because you can't meet face to face, you need to look for those ways in order to better connect with investors. And so whether that's at these medical conferences where we're holding these events, the medical conferences have gone virtual, our events have gone virtual. To things like our earnings call, which we just held, where for the very first time we delivered our prepared remarks via video as a way to connect with our investors. Through this period of time, at Medtronic, we've also gone through a CEO transition, and that has another set of things that we need to be able to do when you're introducing a new leader to investors, and doing that during a pandemic. It hasn't been easy, but we've figured out ways to make it work. So technology, I would say, and communications is also another big learning when it comes to communications, and how do you engage people over video, over things like Zoom, and pull off meetings that are just as productive as if you had traveled halfway around the world to meet with that investor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've often heard a lot of people mentioning that if you've got relationships in place with investors, It's a different story to if you're going out and meeting new potential investors. To be able to build that trust and relationship, as we're doing here, sort of virtually, is more difficult.
Yes.
And I guess that's what you're dealing with on the flip side, where you're having to, introduce a new leadership out to the market as well. So that sounds really interesting. I really wanted to get in because I heard about quite an interesting event that you put on that was turning investors' head and really sort of stood out. You held an investor event that involved a live viewing of a surgery.
Yes.
So can you just tell us a little bit more about the thinking behind this event, how it happened, and just tell us a little bit more about what that involved.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this was one of the most complex events that my department has ever pulled off in investor relations, where and just to set the stage here a little bit, this was probably the most anticipated event in our space in medical technology in 2019. We have a robotic surgery system that's coming to market. We're coming into a market that really is a monopoly market today. It's dominated by the leader, Intuitive Surgical, with their Da Vinci system that are used in hospitals around the world. And so, and Intuitive has done a tremendous job over the last many years developing that market and bringing their technology to market. But Medtronic has a role to play here. Medtronic is a leader, through our acquisition of Covidien a few years back. We became the leader in minimally invasive surgery. And so we're looking to take that leadership and extend our leadership there into robotic assisted surgery. So you have a setup here where the street knows Intuitive Surgical. They don't know about our offering. We had been completely stealth to that point over several years on what our robot was going to be. And there was a lot of anticipation in order to be able to see this robot. And so then we're presented with this idea of, well, how do we pull that off? How do we really engage investors, analysts, and let them be able to experience this robot that's bringing a lot of innovation to the field of robotic surgery. There's multiple components, it's mobile, and so we wanted to be able to feature some of those innovations that we're bringing to market. And so we decided that we would present this to investors and show them a live surgery as part of our testing. So in order to get this product to market, we have surgeons that come in from all over the world that use the system, that are doing specific things that we're testing and making sure they work before we would release the robot. And there's only a few places in the world where we're able to do this. One happened to be in Hartford, Connecticut. Hartford has a center where they do robotic surgery, where they train surgeons on robots. And while Hartford is not a world financial center, so we had to work on the logistics of how do you get investors around the world to that place. How do you get them engaged in a surgery that can take several hours? So which parts are the most important? How do you bring in several hundred into a venue like that and give them that opportunity? So those were all questions that we worked through. And in the end, it turned out to be a tremendously successful event. From all the things that an IRO would look at, were your messages captured and repeated? And check. Did the event go without any technical difficulties, which you're always worried about, and you're preparing for those kind of things? And yes, everything came off well. So I thought my team and the team at Medtronic did just a tremendous job in showing this real innovative piece of medical equipment and getting the investment community to understand where this could fit in this expanding market.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds amazing. I love the way that you've sort of embraced the technology, and even though there is a little bit of a barrier, when you've got something tangible, you've got this robot that people kind of need to understand and sort of see it in action. I think it's a great approach that you've taken. Am I right in thinking that you also live video streamed the event? And are there any sort of learnings from that aspect that you can put into your sort of wider IR program?
Yeah. So we did have live video going inside the facility, because you have a few hundred people that are coming to the event, and you can only bring in so many into the operating room, where they're scrubbing up and wearing gowns and able to come in. And so, in order to give everybody that experience of being in the operating room, we had several cameras mounted in the operating room. We had the surgeon was mic'd up and talking while he was doing the surgery, speaking to a surgeon in a hall nearby where we were all and we're watching it up on the screen. And so, there's technical complexity to doing that. You have multiple cameras, you're calling out the shots, and what are you going to put on the screen? You have the two-way audio so that you can be describing what's going on. A surgeon who has to be focused on what he is doing in the operating room, and then have a narrating surgeon that can talk about, okay, this surgeon is doing this piece of the procedure, and see how the robot is doing this. And so that worked really well. And I think originally we had thought, well, why don't we just have all of the people in the room watching the video? But there was a piece of this where there was some skepticism. Does this technology really exist? And anytime you're doing video, you could have critics out there that would say, oh, you staged that, or you pieced those pieces of video together. And so it was really important to have this live component where we brought the sell side analysts that cover Medtronic, and we gave them the ability to scrub up, put on gowns, and come into the operating room so that they could see with their own eyes the surgery in action. The people in the room could see not only the robot, but see the sell side analyst standing behind in the shot. To make this to get rid of any of that skepticism that this was a doctored video. And it worked. Everybody felt like they were immersed in the experience of the surgery, even if they weren't into the surgery. And looking back, of course, that was last fall, prior to the pandemic. But those learnings have transferred into how we think about video, and we use video all the time now. Something that went from kind of an awkward two-way conversation. We're all getting very used to communicating with people around the world using video, and whether that's in the events we do at virtual healthcare meetings, to the earnings call that we just had, to meetings with investors, we're using video all the time now.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. And just to pick up on that point around skepticism and making sure that when something is, virtual, knowing that there's no trickery in the background and overcoming that. I think that's a really key point that I've not heard many people talk about, but I can totally see why you've kind of gone down this route, which is fantastic. Are there any other short changes that you've made, kind of short or long term? I know you've mentioned your earnings call quite a bit. What other changes have you made to your wider IR program in the last kind of 12 months or so?
Yeah. So I'll pick up on the earnings call. I mentioned that we have a new CEO at Medtronic, and we just went through his first earnings call as CEO. And when you think about introducing a new CEO to investors in the investment community, you think about, you're going to be flying around the world and meeting with your top shareholders. You're going to make sure that the sell side analysts have a chance to meet with the new CEO face to face. You think about having an investor day where the CEO can lay out the strategy for the company, the long range strategy for the company. All of those things that are in the IRO checklist of things you do when you bring on a new CEO. We've had to adapt, and one of the things that we did was with our most recent earnings call here, because our CEO hadn't had that chance to meet face to face with a number of investors, we felt like video would be a good way for people to really see his passion, his energy, his vision for the company, in a way that an audio, telephone audio just can't capture. And so we set up an HD video stream, and executed that, and the feedback has just been tremendous. The street really picked up on the energy level that our CEO had, and they really appreciated the format of video. So that's been a big learning. Medtronic at IR, we do probably half a dozen to a dozen investor events per year at different healthcare conferences. These are the big medical congresses around the world where doctors get together and present data, clinical data, and our sell side analysts and will come to these events. We're typically getting a hotel conference room and everybody's sitting on chairs and we're up front and you've got the slide and you're webcasting it out. That's I think most IROs have seen those kind of events. To pivot to something where you have that same level of engagement, you have a management team that now is spread out all over the world in many cases. You have presentations that you want to be able to get across. You want to have a Q&A session so analysts can come in and do that. And you need to webcast it out for Reg FD compliance. And so we've had to adapt and we've done a number of events, whether it was at the American College of Cardiology back in March when we were just at the very beginning kind of this shutdown and no travel and having to figure that out. Some big medical data that was coming out and we needed to be able to share that. And so we learned how to pull that off. We did it again at the American Diabetes Association conference in June, where we highlighted these kind of things. So that's been a big learning on how to pull off these kind of events. And we've had to reach in, do some innovation, figure out, work with our IT teams as well on how we can use some of the off-the-shelf technologies like WebEx events or Zoom events, but then also patch all of that in and make sure we're webcasting it. So it's been very interesting, but at the same time, the feedback has been tremendous, and the fact that it means that we're not traveling, we're not living on airplanes and living in hotels, and we're able to more efficiently, I think, get our work done. It's been a real interesting experience.
Absolutely, and I think that the speed in which people like yourself have sort of pivoted, as you say, sort of adapted is particularly commendable as well. And yeah, I mean, just in general, I'm curious to understand what it is for you that you consider to be a hallmark of great IR, across the sector or across the market as we head into next year. What do you think makes for great investor relations?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think during a pandemic, going back to basics is really important and not forgetting those things. So I think about, investors, especially right now, investors are inundated with information. I know my inbox is inundated with sell-side calls all day long with doctors all over the world in hospitals in different areas. And okay, what's going on in hospital X and Y and Z? What's your % of procedures today? How does that compare to pre-pandemic levels? And you're just getting this incredible amount of information. And the IRO's job is really to take that and take that information that's external as well as with your company, pair that and present it in a way that's very efficiently absorbed by the street. You want to reduce the noise and come out with the signal and the things that really matter in a very clear and concise way. That's communication 101, and it really matters right now during the pandemic. So whether that's keeping investors updated, as we were right at the depths of the pandemic when our business was under tremendous pressure, pulling together and doing some intra-quarter communications so that investors could get a good sense of how we were doing. And what's also been really interesting here is we've been increasing our ESG messaging over the years as investors have been demanding more ESG messaging. But during the pandemic has really brought ESG to light. How are companies treating their employees during this period? What are you doing for your communities? And how are you helping your customers? And when you think about my company, Medtronic, what we've done during the pandemic, a lot of our messaging has been focused on what is Medtronic doing for its employees, for our customers, for our communities, and that's ESG messaging. And it's bringing it to light in a way that this isn't some sort of manufactured on the side messaging that can sometimes take place in ESG. This is true to what the company does. It's true to our mission at Medtronic and how we step up in a pandemic. So that's been really important to to use this time to highlight what the company is doing, really to help the world get through this pandemic faster.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that sounds great. My final question, you know, when you get to the end of this year and you get half a second to sort of sit back and reflect, what is it that you're most proud of, you know, year to date? What do you think sets you and your team's kind of investor relations activities apart from all of your peers and others in the industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I work in a sector with medical technology where there are a number of really great IROs and IR teams and a long history of that. You know, I'm thinking even I got to learn from one of the best when we acquired Covidien and Cole Lanham, you know, who's won several IR Magazine awards. It's a great sector, great IROs that are here, and so differentiating is not always easy. I think looking back, when we get to the end here and we look back and we say, you know, how did Medtronic differentiate itself from its peers? I think it's really going to come down to innovation and what we were able to pull off here. Innovation in investor relations, which, you know, investor relations has been around a long time, but there's always innovation going on. And I think, you know, a company like Medtronic that's known for medical technology innovation, we like to pull that into our department and say, how can we innovate in IR? So whether that's the robot event that we talked about, which was something brand new, to being the first in medical technology to have a video earnings call. And I know there's other sectors that do that, but to bring that in and really be the first there, to doing things like in our company where we compete against a lot of small publicly traded companies that are more specific into a given business, where Medtronic competes across a lot of them. We've had to innovate and pull together and feature our general managers across the company for the investment community. So we have these podcasts on our website where we'll have these one-on-one interviews with general managers that can go really deep into a given business. And for an investor that might be following a pure play, that's been incredibly helpful for them, and to show how competitive we are as Medtronic in those, excuse me, in those spaces. So I think looking back, it's going to be things like that, all of the different things that we've been able to innovate this year to make sure that we're continuing great investor communication through a pandemic.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And it's been great. Thank you so much for joining us today. I guess to pick out a few points that I've sort of learned from you, number one is, you know, really look for that innovation in terms of how you're communicating. I think understanding that when things are virtual, there might be some skepticism, particularly if you're trying to demonstrate something tangible, something real, that you would usually have to travel and physically see something. You know, understand that and think how you can use technology, whether it's off the shelf or working with your IR teams to sort of solve that. And of course, as you mentioned, the change in focus on ESG, you know, lots of very people-orientated factors. So, you know, human capital, social issues, employee health and safety, your purpose as a company in society. So yeah, fantastic to speak to you today, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, look forward to speaking again soon, but thanks a lot for your time.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, Ryan. Bye.
Okay. Bye.